ladies, and welcome back to the Sweet Tea Podcast. As always, I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Ariana.
Hey, Taylor, and hello, everyone. I'm very excited for today's episode. We're crossing into borders, cultures, and how all of that comes together.
Yeah, and we're also joined by the fabulous Melissa Ford. Melissa, can you give us a little intro?
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. My name's Melissa Ford. I'm a policy director at the Secure and Sovereign Texas campaign here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, earlier today, you guys tried some really fun drinks. I won't give it away, but let's go ahead and throw it over to you guys.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to this part of the segment. Today, Melissa brought us some awesome drink for this morning. Do you want to let me know what we're drinking?
Yeah, so you told me to bring like a food or drink item. I explained to you that you can't really get Bolivian food here. Bolivia is so like unknown, I guess, here. I've not been able to find any Bolivian food. I have some frozen food at home, but it would have been very complicated to like bring it here and bake it and all of that. So I just decided the easiest thing would be to bring you some tea.
Nice.
And the tea that I chose is coca tea.
Okay.
And the reason that I chose it is because it's very like emblematic of Andean culture. As you know, I grew up in Cochabamba. I grew up in Bolivia. That city is right on the Andes Mountains. And this is something that a lot of Andean people do. A lot of the indigenous population, they drink coca tea. This one is a little bit different than the coca tea that they drink because they will just use like the full leaves of the coca leaf.
And what's the difference for this one?
This is like dried, dehydrated.
Oh, okay. So they just put the fresh leaves in water and that's what they drink? Interesting.
Yeah, a lot of the time like you'll put some sugar in it.
Have you tried it that way?
Yeah, I have tried it.
Okay.
But this is very like it's lost a lot of its components. A lot of people in Bolivia will even eat the raw leaf.
Oh, wow.
You see people doing it all the time. It's got a lot of medicinal benefits. I was explaining to you, it's good that we're drinking this in the morning because it helps keep you awake. So I would not drink it at night. I would not recommend drinking it at night.
It's really caffeinated then?
Yeah, the leaf itself.
Okay.
The herb itself will
that's
keep
kind of
you
what I'm
awake.
looking for right now.
It'll
so I'm
stave
good with
off
that.
hunger. So this one's
Nice.
obviously a little bit different because it's not the leaf.
It's a little bit hot still, but I'm going to try to give it
It's very
give it a
hot.
taste.
Try not to burn yourself.
Okay.
But you'll notice it has like a very like bitter flavor almost. It's not sweet. Kind of tastes like green tea.
It does taste like green tea.
A little bit,
I like
yeah.
that. Yeah. Did I tell you I'm not a coffee person? Or
No,
do you know
I
that
didn't
about
know
me?
that, no.
Yeah, so I don't know why. I just don't like bitter things. So I don't like coffee. I don't like beer, but I go for tea if I'm
You like
going to go out
bitter
with people.
tea or like the more fruity tea?
I mean, I like both. I don't know why that's the weird thing. Like with tea, I like all of the herbal taste especially.
I feel
so,
you. I feel
yeah. So how long did you live in Bolivia?
My whole life, basically until I moved to the U.S. for college.
Okay.
So I lived there till I graduated when I was 17. I moved here to start college and then basically lived in Texas and then D.C. for a couple of years. I moved back to Bolivia about 2 years ago at the tail end of COVID, just because I started working remotely.
Oh, okay.
And so I
Were
figured...
you still like working for, because you worked in D.C. under the Trump administration, right?
Yes, during
Okay.
the Trump administration, we were actually never remote and we never stopped working during COVID.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it was a little bit after the Trump administration, I got my first job post-White House and did that for about 6 months in person. And then I started working remote just because there was never anyone in the office. I started doing it from my apartment in DC.
And then do your parents still live in Bolivia?
Yes.
So you got to be closer to them while you were remote? Right?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
So I moved back home.
Yeah.
I was engaged at the time too, to my current husband. So I just really wanted to be closer to family, to him, to my friends. And so that's why I moved back home. And then after we got married, we moved back to the US. And now we're in Austin.
Nice. But you
Yeah.
used to have your summers here in Texas, right? Like Texas
Yes.
wasn't new for you growing up.
Yeah, so not a lot of people do this in Bolivia, but I went to an American school, which is like a
Gotcha.
small private school where they teach you English and all of that. And so we
Is it
actually
one of those like international schools?
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
Yeah.
So you still do like some classes in like Spanish and other stuff. And you'll like learn foreign languages, but they stick to the same schedule as we have here in the US, which means that you have your summer off.
Nice.
Whereas in Bolivia, we have like a calendar year school schedule, so you'll get like December and January off.
Okay.
But because that's our summer, right?
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
so I went to an American school that had the American calendar, meaning we had June and July off. And so we would just come here for the entire summer. Not here to Austin, but we would go to Paris, Texas, because that's where my dad was born. And so
Gotcha.
I grew up coming to Texas. I grew up loving Texas. That's why when I graduated from high school, it was really like the only option to choose for college. And that's how I ended up in Texas.
What do you think about yourself now that you've lived here for few years? You've like been back to Texas. Do you consider yourself to be Texan, or
Yeah.
how does that impact you?
I guess I've always considered myself to be Texan. Like, I've always even told people growing up, because I am half Texan, right?
Yeah.
My dad is Texan, my mom's Bolivian, but it's just kind of like a lot of people will talk about what it's like to have like two nationalities, because here people consider me Bolivian. And in Bolivia, a lot of people are like, oh, she's American. And I'm not either. Like, I'm both. So, yeah, I consider myself Texan now. I always have.
So what made you were obviously going to American school beforehand.
Yeah.
So what was that transition like whenever you went to college, and what was that motivation to want to do something here in the US?
So I guess Bolivia I'll talk about all the attributes that Bolivia has, but it doesn't have a lot of opportunity. The schools there aren't great. The jobs that you can get there aren't great unless your family has like a very successful business. And so my dad worked in foreign aid. He retired from the US government. My mom worked as a local hire, and then she just pretty much stayed at home. And so she had like other things that she did, but I guess there wasn't much opportunity for me there if I stayed. And so I knew that if I came to the US, there would be a better education, better jobs, a lot more opportunity to do something with my life. And so my parents never really gave me the option. I think obviously
It was implied that that's what you would end up doing.
yeah. And they're alone now, so I think they always wanted to have me home with them, and they get so excited when I go home. I was just home last week, and so they always want to keep me there, but at the same time they know that there's not a lot of future in Bolivia right now, unfortunately. Maybe one day that will change.
Yeah.
But that's never really been the case.
And we're probably going to touch on this more later on whenever we meet up with Taylor. But is there was part of like what you saw in Bolivia, and like knowing that the economic status and the way that people live there, was that part of your motivation to go into policy specifically? And whenever you started your career here?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that even when I was little, I knew that I eventually wanted to work in something that could help people and that could create change. And I think a big part of that was that's what my parents did. Like, my dad was a public servant his whole life since he graduated from school. And my mom did that too. And so I think ever since I was little, I knew I wanted to go into somewhere in that line of work. But growing up and then going to college and seeing what happened with Bolivia went from being like a great country, it at one point was a very rich country, to being a very messy and a very dysfunctional socialist country under the regime that we were under the dictator that we were under. And so I think seeing that just, makes you think differently. It makes you think in a different type of way. And that's when I realized, like, I really want to be in policy. And so I think living in Bolivia, growing up in Bolivia, seeing the effects of socialism have made me want to go into this line of work. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I'm excited to get into that a
me
little
too.
bit more with you, and then also talk about what your job here is at TBPF, which is working more closely with border and secure and sovereign Texas. So
Awesome.
let's move on to meeting up with Taylor.
Wow, ladies, that looked like a good time. Great story. What was that tea that you guys were drinking?
It's a coca leaf tea, right?
Yes. So I brought in like the tea bags because those are the easy ones to get. And those are the ones that you can get here and bring in here. But normally it's very proper of like Andean culture to consume the coca leaf, which
Does it taste like chocolate?
no, it's not. It's not like cacao leaf.
Oh,
It's
sad.
like it's closer to green tea, actually. It's just like an herbal leaf that people they consume it different ways. You can chew it, you can put it in tea, you can do different things with it. But I brought like the dry dehydrated leaves just so you can get like a taste of it.
Actually, question. Okay, so when I was out in Colorado skiing, I was at like this little like ski village, and this girl like in a hostel, and they had like this communal kitchen, and this girl had like this jar, but she put all of these like leaves, like green leaves at top, and then it was heated, and she just soaked it and would like sip out of a straw. Would that have been coca
Oh.
leaves?
No, it wouldn't have because you can't actually get the leaves here.
I think she brought them from her home country.
You're talking about it's called mate, right? I
Yeah,
think
it's
that's what
probably
you're
yerba,
describing.
yerba mate.
Oh.
Yeah, which they also do in Bolivia, but you actually, even if you bring them, like, you won't be able to bring them
Yeah,
through
that one's
international
popular, though,
boundaries.
throughout like different parts of Latin America, and they do it slightly differently in different places.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this one like you can't bring over the border.
You can't because
why?
if you have the raw leaf, if you add like a ton of chemicals and put it through a long process, that's what's used to make cocaine.
Well, that makes sense. Coca
Yeah.
leaves,
Yeah.
cocaine.
Yeah, but if you
Okay.
have like the dry dehydrated leaves, they're completely medicinal. I was telling Ari that's what people will use for different purposes. So it'll keep you awake. A lot of people do it because it keeps them awake. A lot of people that work long hours, like security guards, will chew it because it staves off hunger as well.
Interesting.
And if you have like people coming to Bolivia, going to our capital city, the highest capital city in the world, we will give them coca leaves to chew on as well because it helps with altitude sickness and a
Okay,
whole bunch
highest
of
as an
different things.
elevation because you're
Yeah.
saying like medicinal is the highest.
No.
I'm like, wait, hold on. Okay,
Yeah,
okay, got it.
helps with
Well, in
altitude.
Texas, we have a tea and it's
Sweet tea.
It's sweet tea, and we put a lot of sugar in it, and we love it.
I love it, yeah.
And you can. I'm sure take that over the border anytime.
Yes,
Bring it back. with
easy,
you.
yeah.
Amazing. Well, let's go ahead and slip into our policy pulse.
Yeah, you can go ahead on that one, Taylor.
Cool. So you sent us an article from the Texas Scorecard written by Valerie
Munoz.
Every time I get it wrong. One more time.
So Valerie Munoz is the one who
Yes.
wrote this article.
Yes.
Texas Scorecard.
Love it. Great. And I'm just going to read like a quick section for our audience, and then I'll have you speak to it.
Sounds good.
So she wrote that TikTok is known for its strict regulations and censorship of content. Wow. Guys, I promise I can read. They even have a safety and civility section on their community guideline page that states that they do not permit human exploitation, quote, including trafficking and smuggling. However, TikTok seems to be aware of the account. This account like has been promoting like human smuggling. So TikTok seems to be aware of this account and has placed a disclaimer on one of the advertisements reading, quote, participating in this activity could result in you or others getting hurt, end quote. End of the article. So it sounds like TikTok is just complicit in these different individuals using TikTok's account, like using their account to promote smuggling. Can you walk us through like what that looks like?
Yeah, so the reason this is so shocking, and it's actually been happening for a while, and we have campaigns here that work on that, right? Like our Better Tech campaigns work on holding big tech accountable, big tech like TikTok. But the reason it's so shocking is because it's so blatant. And you can actually look it up on Google, you can look it up on TikTok, you can see the videos yourselves. But when I saw it, I was like very taken aback because a lot of these TikTok videos, what they're doing, obviously it's not TikTok making it, but it's TikTok that's allowing it to
Right.
still be on there and to still reach more people. But what you see in these videos are like handfuls, fistfuls stacked up of like cash, and they're advertising like, oh, this could be yours, like reach out to us if you could help us with like running some projects or stuff like that. So they're basically advertising that you will get rich if you help a lot of these cartels and a lot of these operations with their human smuggling practices.
Wow.
And it happens a lot. It happens with underage kids. I can send you guys some examples of kids as young as 12,
Oh my gosh.
14 that are being dragged into this. A lot of the kids, you know, American kids, because they see advertisements on TikToks that you can make quick and easy money if you help drive people from one destination to the other. It sounds very harmless, right?
Wow. Yeah,
but what
yeah.
they're doing is they're driving migrants. They're driving people that are often being like smuggled through the border, that are being abused by cartels, so they can pin it on someone else, especially underage kids, because they wouldn't get the same kind of punishment that an
Wow.
adult would.
So they're advertising to American kid,
Yeah.
like 17-year-olds, say.
Yeah,
and
they're
like,
using TikTok. They're using, a lot of the time they use Snapchat. You
Oh
can
my
find a lot of
gosh.
like screen recorded or recorded from other devices a lot of Snapchat videos where people are recruiting kids. They're recruiting American kids.
Oh my
And
goodness.
the reason I brought this up to you guys, and the reason that I think it's really important for people to know about it, is they're coming for the US. They're coming for your kids. It's happening. And so I think it's important for parents to realize how they're not going to be protected by big tech, and they can't depend on that.
I think it highlights just like another area of the way that they're harming children. So it's not just the people that they're smuggling across that are being impacted by this.
Right.
They're also like making like American children into part of their criminal
Criminals.
ring.
Like
Yeah.
literally these like 17-year-olds are getting involved in like cartel business.
Yeah, 100%.
That's going to wreck their lives.
It's going to wreck their lives, and it's very dangerous. A lot of these end up in high-speed car chases. A lot of those end in really bad wrecks. If you go to any border city, it's almost an everyday thing. Our campaign was just in El Paso a couple weeks. I think at this point it's been like at least 2 months since we were in El Paso. But when we met with DHS there, they said that sometimes they have 3 of them a day.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and they were
And
showing
those are
us
the ones they're catching.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And they were showing us footage of one going right past our hotel. It happens all the time. And a lot of people end up being killed by this, either through crashes, or they get hit, or they get run over, and you see a lot of these vehicles, they have like 12, 15 people in a very
my
small car.
gosh.
And so when a wreck happens, a lot of the time it's deadly. So they're putting your kids in danger.
Were there any other like shocking things that came up while you were in El Paso that that's happening at the border?
Yeah. Well, the reason we were in El Paso was for the end of Title 42. And so,
Can you explain what that is really
yeah,
fast?
Title 42 was basically what was in place to limit the number of migrants that were being allowed in. It was a COVID regulation to limit the number of migrants coming in for health reasons. And it was extended and it was extended, and under the Biden administration it expired so that nothing would be in the way. And so we were there to see like what the border would look like. And there was a lot of surprising things for me. I had never personally been to the border before. I obviously saw a lot of footage. I heard a lot of stories, but to be there in person and to see it with your own eyes is really sad, because you see people that are really desperate and that will do anything to get across the border to the other side because they're being told that there's so much promise on the other side. And word spreads like wildfire. And we actually, only a couple of us, I went with the Mexico City reporter, David Ogren. I had taken my passport, so I had no problem going across the border. So I actually went into Mexico to see what the migrant camps look like.
So they have them camped on the other side of the border in Mexico?
Yeah, like living on the streets for weeks until
And
they
sorry,
get
these migrant camps are just like people that have come from just not just Mexico, but just like
everywhere.
Yeah.
And that was very surprising to me, because we saw people from Africa. We saw people from Central America. I speak Spanish, obviously, so I got to talk to a couple of people that had come from Colombia, Guatemala, and they journeyed for months to come here because they heard people saying that the border is open and that you can come into the U.S. and it's going to be easy for you to get a job, and they don't know the reality of it. And the reality of it is that the border is entirely controlled by cartels, and they're not going to let you cross for free. People are indebted for many months after they cross, or they have to pay it off some way or another. And there's a lot of injustice that's happening at the border right now. And what's happening right now is very inhumane. And I always try to tell people that.
Different types of like sexual violence as well.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like, what are the percentages right now? Do you remember off the top of your head?
I don't know the percentages right now. I do know that a lot of the people that are most vulnerable to this are women and children.
Yeah.
And so
But
there's
it's far above the like majority of people. Like, it's way higher than 50% of like women and children who are taken across the border are sexually assaulted in some way.
it's almost assumed
Yeah.
that it's going to happen. And I don't want to get you guys too depressed right now, but a lot of the stories that you hear from Border Patrol is just basically people cross, especially women, especially children, knowing that that's a price that you have to pay.
Oh my gosh.
And you see, young girls crossing on their own who have been sent across to the U.S. because they were given so much false hope, right? That like it's that easy, but they were sent across to the US with like morning after pills or situations like
Oh
that.
my
Yeah, it's very
gosh.
depressing, but I think it's important to know like what's happening at our border. I think
Yeah.
we talk about it a lot more because we're in Texas and we're in policy,
Mm-hmm.
and we hear these sad stories and people come to us with these problems, but I think that regular Americans have to know too. This is not just happening in Texas.
Yeah.
It's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
And, you know, the cartels basically have a firm grasp on like every city in America. It's all border towns now, not just Texas. And so
And
it's
then the
important
border
for people
towns,
to
like if
know that.
everywhere else is now starting to feel the heat of it, the border towns are even more severe than that. Because I grew up like in the Mission McAllen area, so super South Texas, and
Yeah.
it's like really weird even in the past few years how much that's changed during different
Really?
administrations and how
Yeah.
bad it's like the levels of danger have gone up and down at different points. But like I remember of just a few years ago, in the early years of the Biden administration, whenever people were like pouring
Oh, in
across
the very
more.
beginning when he first got
Yeah,
elected.
and there was
Yeah.
exactly, and so like it was in bigger numbers than ever before, and there was like
Yeah.
a whole section of like underneath one of the highways that had to be like shut off to just
Oh,
like try
wow.
to like
Manage.
like
Yeah.
detain like some of these people because there was nowhere else to be able to process any of that, and so that's like something that's directly impacting all of the people who live around it.
Do you
So-
still have family down there? Like,
Oh, yeah,
what do they
that's
tell
where-
you about what it's like to live there now?
So, I mean, it just depends on which part you're in, on how severely you're going to be feeling it. So, like it's really interesting how like some of the people who are like who've illegally immigrated in here, it's been like from years and years before, and so they're a little bit more like just a part of like daily life. But then, but whenever you have like if you have land that's right on the border, we've
Yeah.
like known people who have had like full like roving gangs of
Oh,
like
yeah.
cartels come through their property, and like one woman was talking about how she had like a playground in like the back of her
Oh, wow.
yard, and in the past she'd be able to like have her grandkids over, and she doesn't even
Yeah.
invite them out at all anymore
Not
because of
anymore.
all the people they found.
Yeah.
I was
So-
actually in Mexico this last weekend, and
What part were you in?
well, Tulum. You know,
Well,
so
no, it's still all of the cartel stuff. They're not outside, like just outside of there. Even in those areas,
Oh,
they're present.
let me tell you, I was shocked when we went to like a little beach club or whatever, listening to music, and all of a sudden, like people were blatantly asking, like, would you like cocoa? Cocoa? Would you like snow? Would you like this? Would you like that? Like, do you want like full on just offering me drugs? And I was like, no, please get away from like it started stressing me out. Like, is there gonna be
Yeah.
something like in my drink? And my so that was really surprising. Don't be afraid to go to Tulum, guys. It's still great. I'm just saying, like, it is a little crazy. And like you could tell that like there were guys with guns like in the back. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sure
Yeah.
that's cartel.
Yeah.
And, you know, I wasn't like fearing for my life. It was more just like, this is real. Like this is actually happening.
But if you do get too comfortable in those areas, like definitely stick to the touristy parts.
Oh, yeah.
Don't go off on your own into any of those other things, because we've had the other part of living in the Rio Grande Valley and by a border town is you have everyone knows at least like knows multiple people who have taken trips to Mexico because they used to be comfortable with it and have gotten kidnapped at some point. Some of them end up making it back, but like some of them
Americans?
cannot. Yeah,
That's
we
shocking
have multiple
because-
family friends who've like been kidnapped at some point and have either escaped in different ways or like had to be paid like ransom for like I think like for one of them like about $1 million. So
Oh, I definitely did not. It's hard to imagine that. Like I've always thought like it's hard to imagine that they would like abduct an American, especially like after that big scandal with like that woman who got abducted like from London or whatever with the long blonde hair and like it like the whole nation was in uproar over it. It's hard to imagine that like they would do that because I just can see like full court press America would just like come down on them.
I mean, it's a little bit weird because it's some people who have dual citizenship too, and like they like you still are
So they're like constantly
Mexican.
going back and
Yeah.
forth, back and forth. The other thing that like really stuck out from my trip, and this is going to be hopefully a little bit of a lighter tone. So my friend and I, we'd been to Tulum before, and we were taking the girls downtown, and we were in this neighborhood that's getting developed, that's nicer. And so we're like, let's just walk to downtown with this big group of girls all dressed up. And I was like, it's fine, we'll be fine, and we were. But there was this road you have to pass through and that like was not developed, and you know the people actually live there, and we were like, it's 0.3 miles, let's just walk through it. It's like the only way through that, or we have to get a taxi. So we start walking through, and we quickly realize like mistake has been made. I mean, it was like the girls were very scared to just be walking down this tiny strip, and like part of me was like, it's good for them to see this because it's like Mexico is like a second world country, right? Like it does have like all of these like parts of it that are, I don't know how to describe it. It was just very eye-opening and sad to see like how they live and like how underdeveloped it was, like with like trash everywhere and like buildings not even fully like, and like there's like the road is all great, and like we felt like everyone was just like staring at us, mostly like we felt like the men just like staring and like walking close to us, and it was just like, well, okay, that wasn't a smart move on our part, so obviously we taxied everywhere from after that. We were fine, but it was just a crazy experience to see.
Yeah, Mexico is I always say this, but Mexico is very misunderstood.
Yeah, I like that.
And and so a lot of the violence and a lot of the crime is concentrated into very few areas. Largely they depend, like a lot of these places depend on the tourism.
Exactly.
So they make sure that those areas are relatively safe. But people will always come to me. I get this ask all the time, and they're like, do you think it's safe to go to Mexico? Like, there's this thing happening in Mexico City, but I don't think I want to go. Like, I've heard the news stories, and I always tell them the same thing. I feel much safer in Mexico City than I do in the US.
Really?
And I think that part of that is like a lot of the violence that happens here happens because of cartels. A lot of the lawlessness is in like liberal cities. Like downtown Austin is actually pretty dangerous, you guys.
I know.
And I walk to and from work every day. Sometimes I leave late. I don't always feel safe here. And it's interesting because Mexico City is so safe. Like you never hear of like bad instances happening to the tourists, except like maybe petty crime, like if you have your phone out and someone snatches it.
Sure.
But it's interesting because there seems to be like an unsigned agreement that politicians and cartel members and all of the big names will send their families to live in Mexico City. And so it's almost like an agreement that they have that like you won't do anything bad there.
Yeah.
There won't be shootings in Mexico City. Like you don't hear about like actual bad stuff happening there. That's in the other areas of Mexico that like
So if
we
the
would not go
politicians
to.
aren't there, then it's like free reign, basically.
It's where the families live. Yeah. It's where their families live. It's where they keep them. They know it's safe. I walk everywhere in Mexico City when I'm there, and I feel very safe. I think what you were saying about like the people disappearing, it's a reality. You never used to hear of someone being killed or someone disappearing in Mexico if they were American, because there was still respect for the U.S. back then. That's gone away. Mexico no longer respects the U.S. They no longer care to have a partnership with the U.S.
Wow.
And so you're hearing about it a little bit more. And I think, though, it doesn't compare to how many Mexicans have to live with the violence in Mexico. Right now, under the current presidency, there's a person going missing every hour. If
like
you could even fathom
like
that.
a Mexican citizen.
Yes.
Wow.
Someone in Mexico disappears every hour under López Obrador, the current president. So, it's getting bad.
That's crazy. All of this is like such a good transition into our pop culture with principles, which like is normally a very upbeat section, but this is like, so this movie came out, The Sound of Freedom. And it is a movie, like, have we all watched it?
Yes. I thought it was done so well.
Yeah.
And definitely highlighted an issue that I don't think has been like actually highlighted enough by the media.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's about this guy, this federal agent rescues this boy from child traffickers and just realizes that in his job he's just like and then he has to like step away from it, right? Like remind me, like it's been a hot second. He like goes on to like his next job or whatever,
He
and
quits his job,
and then he's
basically.
just so like, yeah, and then eventually he gets to the point where he's like, I have to go back and continue helping and solving this problem. So he leaves his job as a federal agent to go rogue and just handle it himself. I like this one line. It says, he quits his job and journeys deep into the Colombian jungle, putting his life on the line to free her, the main girl in the show, from a fate worse than death. I love that.
That's very dramatic.
It's very dramatic.
But it is what happened. And like that's crazy. Like this is just one of several stories that he has about like the rescue missions that he's taken as well.
Oh yeah, that's the other important thing. This is a true story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a true story. That's the other cool thing. So talk to us about like the film part.
So
Cinematography.
yeah, well, it was actually made years ago, and it just had trouble with distribution. If I'm not mistaken, it was actually originally owned by Disney to some extent.
No way.
Yeah, I don't remember how much of the rights they had to do, or if they just participated in some of the funding. But for some reason, people in Hollywood did not want this story to be distributed,
so
and it was for
weird.
like 5 years. They
5 years,
yeah, 5 years
yeah.
they weren't able to get distributions until Angel Studios were eventually able to buy and publicize it. So, it's yeah, but it was made years ago, and then finally now that it's had its release, it's done incredibly well. I think it did end up like beating out Indiana Jones not only on multiple nights. I think it ended up grossing more than it as well. So
Oh, yeah.
it was like making way more than these other blockbuster films, and yet it wasn't advertised in the same way that other films are.
Yeah, it
on
wasn't getting
media.
attention. It wasn't
They
like,
weren't
oh,
brought
check
onto
out this new
talk shows.
movie.
Exactly, yeah. And so it was really pushed to the side, and which is like a really
Don't you think
weird
it's
thing.
interesting though how like the Barbie movie gets all this attention and it's very much like, I mean, don't get me wrong, like I loved the whole like
Yeah.
pink and we've already discussed that, but like the fact that the Barbie movie is getting so much more attention when people have said like I didn't understand the plot line, it was a little woke, like it did push like an agenda, but like whatever, that's getting more attention than this true story.
And it's made well. It's not like, because I know like some like Christian films, for example, even if they
Yes.
have good messaging,
Yes,
they're
yes.
not usually like, if you're just comparing it like as a movie, they usually don't hold up.
Yeah.
This one here that's like based on a true
well
story,
made.
and yeah, it's
Yeah.
actually super well made. So I think like acting was great. The fact that they were like and I think they also handled it really ethically, the way that they like were able to use these child actors, but they normally weren't telling them what was actually happening in it.
Good
So
point.
yeah, they did a great job. If I had any critiques, it would only be on I felt like the music wasn't mixed as well as the rest
Yeah,
of the
you
movie.
get it, Ari. You critique that
But
film.
the rest, but it was actually real. But if that's my only critique, everything else was done so incredibly well that it's crazy that it's had to be a like a grassroots movement to find a movie like this and promote a movie
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah, Melissa, what did you think about the movie? What resonated with you?
It actually, I think a lot of people were so surprised that people weren't talking about the movie, that people weren't like, they were surprised that it sold more than Mission Impossible and Indiana Jones, but that it wasn't being promoted. That actually doesn't surprise me as much because, like, working on a lot of these issues that we work on, people don't like to talk about them, right? They're very uncomfortable to talk about. And so it wasn't surprising to me that people didn't want to release the movie, that people were like against the movie. And that's very unfortunate, right?
Yeah.
Because it's important for people to know what's happening. It's important for people to realize that like children around the world are not safe. And that's not only with what's happening in the Colombian jungle. That's in general. That's with kids in the US. That's with kids at the border. There's a lot of injustice going on. But I also thought the movie was really well made. I would encourage anybody to go watch it. I think it's important for us to be aware. And I unfortunately have also realized that a lot of the time in the US, like people have no idea what's going on anywhere else. Like it's easy to live in a bubble, and I guess I would just encourage people to like step out of that comfort zone and know more about what's going on around the world, learn more about like what's happening at our border, what's happening everywhere else.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great organizations out there that do phenomenal work with this sort of stuff. I personally, I'm the type, so Enneagram 1 over here for anyone who knows what the Enneagram is. I am very much oriented by like moral perfectionism and justice. And when I saw this, I remember talking to my dad and telling him that, being raised in Texas, I was like, Dad, like, I want to join the military. Like, I want to go into those situations. And I used to talk about how, and I mean, obviously, like, as an adult, I understand how foolish this is. Don't get me wrong. Like, this is my little, like, teenage self idealizing. I was like, I could get, like, I could be an underground agent and I can go into the trafficking ring and I can go in there and I'll just be super strong and I'll get all of them. And like, ah! And I was like, as you grow up, you're just like, oh my gosh, of course that's like, I think that's in a lot of people's hearts. Like you want to go and you want to fix the problem.
Yeah.
You want to save them and provide justice to those people and those kids and those women. And then, you know, you grow up and you realize like it is so much more complex than you
Yeah.
think. It is not that simple. This has been going on for a long time, but it's just really inspiring to me that a guy went out and just did it. Like to me, that's
Yeah.
just so epic.
It sounds like fiction.
It sounds like fiction to the point where like I almost forgot and I was like, wait, Ari, this is a true story. Wait.
Yeah, this
And
happened.
this is just one of several ones. And in other interviews that he's been doing, he's been talking about how like there's even crazier stories in this one that he's
And
just gone.
the actual, not the actor, the
The actual guy
Yeah.
that's based on. I
Yeah.
forget his name.
Tim
but-
Ballard.
Yes, Tim Ballard.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's
of course,
amazing.
is anyone shocked that his last name's Valor?
No, Ballard.
Oh, well,
If his last name was Valor, that would be.
I
more
was
fitting.
like,
That'd
how
be
poetic
appropriate.
is this?
Yeah.
Well. Me and my names, I just cannot pronounce.
Are the stories of like children being impacted by some of this stuff like part of why you decided to go into policy? And
Well, I'm sorry, what was the question?
oh, like whenever you like knew about like these stories of like the way that like there's human smuggling that's happening and different types of like sex trafficking, and of course some of that overlaps with like the what's happening at the border now for the availability of it. Is that part of what motivates you to continue to be part of policy?
No, that's a great question. Unfortunately not, because I didn't know the extent of it. And I think that a lot of regular people don't know the extent of it. And so I went into politics for different reasons. And then, especially once I got to talking about the border and some of the horrible stories that happen at the border, like I was horrified.
Yeah.
But they're not normally things that you hear unless you're in that policy. And so it wasn't like I heard about all the injustice going on with children and I was like, I need to do something to fix it. Although, like, Taylor, I understand. Even me watching the movie now, I'm like, I have to change careers. Like,
Yeah,
I have to
right?
do, you know, like,
I want to be an agent.
yeah, like, and it's normal for you to think that, but that is not what made me go into policy, but it's kind of what's making me stay. Like, it outrages you and you want to do something to fix it. And I think a lot of people don't know what they could do. I would say, like, you can start right at home. You know, like we live in the US, and one way that you can help children from being abused and victimized is at the border. Like, I always tell people the actual humane thing to do if you care about children being smuggled and if you care about migrants is advocate to close the border. People get very outraged whenever you say something about closing the border or building the wall or about doing anything, the buoys, like doing anything to place a little bit more control over the border because they think it's racist. They think it's anti-immigrant. It's actually pro-immigrant. You're keeping immigrants safe if you are directing them towards points of entry because then they're not being exploited and pushed into the grasp of the cartels where they could do whatever they want with these migrants, and they do. And so I think one way, you know, if you want to help children, close the border. A lot of children, you know, we talk about it with Josh all the time. He's told me some really horrible stories about what he's seen happening to children at the border, but children are abandoned in the heat. Children are abused. They're sold into sex slavery. And this is all happening because right now there's no resources at the border to do something about it. And so that's one way to start.
Yeah.
And your political career though started back when, or like your interest in it, you started in college, right? Pursuing some of that?
Yes. Well, my interest in it started when I was really young, just because my dad was a public servant. He worked for the U.S. government. He worked for alternative development in Bolivia, and he worked for like international development. So basically like aid to poor countries. And so I've always been interested in it. My mom was a local hire down there in Bolivia for the embassy. So they both worked in public service. And so it was kind of instilled in me since I was really young. I always knew I wanted to go into something in that field. I wanted to do something that would help people and would create change, and never knew what that would look like. And so I actually started college and I had no idea what that looked like. I was undecided.
Love it.
for like a year. And then finally, I decided that I would do economics because economics is one way to do it. That's what my dad worked in Bolivia, like basically giving people the tools to be able to help themselves, right? Not just handouts, but a hand up, being able to help people start their own businesses and like knowing what it's like to manage their money. And so that's what I started in. And there's a lot of overlap with what that looks like related to politics. And so I eventually got really interested in politics and did like economics and political science.
Yeah.
And then always knew
And
that I would want to
eventually
work in policy.
and eventually you ended up at the White House
Yeah.
Trump administration. And while you were there, you said something that I think will lead us into the Conservative Council. Whenever you were there, you mentioned that that's whenever you first started to, or like part of when you started to hear more people question you as like someone from Latin America, but also a
Yeah.
conservative and your values with that. So I know
Yeah.
that a huge thing in college now is if you are conservative and you're like, if you're Hispanic, people are start saying comments about making comments about that. And what would
Yeah.
you recommend if people are in that situation? How did you deal with it?
Yeah, so part of it is being like Hispanic, part of it's being a woman, and part of it is just existing. But I'm sure you guys have gotten it. Men get it. Everyone gets it. Like, if you are conservative, if you think differently than what people think that you should think like, you'll be attacked. And we've all been there, lost friends, lost people over it. I think for me, starting at the White House, it wasn't as bad as maybe it would have been for someone from a different country. And I'll tell you why. Bolivia is very conservative still. We have a socialist president, but socially, Bolivia is very conservative. It's largely Catholic. People aren't like liberal in their way of living. And what's happened with us having a socialist regime for so long is people have grown to hate it. People have grown to like love the idea of America and the fact that it's capitalist and that you can get a job easily and that you can keep the money you make and the land that you purchase. And so funny enough, like you'll go back to Bolivia. The first time I went back home for Christmas after I started working in the Trump administration, I felt like I was hiding because my friends from college, my friends from the US, unfollowed me. They sent me aggressive messages. They were like, "You are racist. You're working for the Trump administration. How dare you? You're Hispanic. He says he wants to build a wall." I got more backlash from them. I went back to Bolivia like hiding my face. And people would come up to me even when I was like out in coffee with my mom, because my mom posts everything that I do on Facebook.
That's so great.
So her friends, like my friends that had found out that I was working for the Trump admin, were like, "Trump is my hero." Like,
Oh, wow.
Yes, like people are very obsessed with Trump in Bolivia, especially like a lot of the kids that I went to school with, or kids whose families have businesses, and they've seen how hard it is to not only start but maintain a business in Bolivia. It's almost impossible. So people that have been like personally very affected by the socialist regime, by the authoritarian president that we had for so long, people that have seen like their families face so much injustice in Bolivia, they saw Trump as like a savior almost, which is kind of funny. But I still get it. In Bolivia, like I still get people saying like, "Oh, I remember you used to work for Trump. Like maybe he'll come back in 2024. It's so
Crazy.
funny. So I don't think that I face it the same way that like maybe someone that living in Mexico would have, or maybe even people like you guys like living in the US would have, because
Yeah.
there's a lot more stigma around that there.
That's
But I'm sure you
interesting.
guys have gotten comments.
The other big thing that's like a good advice piece that I think you'd be able to speak to is you're still in your 20s and you have a very successful career right so far in
thank
what you're
you.
doing, which is really impressive. And the thing that I think would be really helpful to people is I think a lot of younger women, and then even throughout most of your career, struggle with imposter syndrome. So like I feel like I have imposter syndrome all the time, where you feel like, oh, maybe I don't deserve to be here, or like I'm not doing a good enough job. And I feel like that sometimes people limit what like trying new things and like applying to programs
Yeah.
because they don't feel like they're that they have the skills necessary for that. So what is it that you
Yeah.
do to overcome that and be where you are?
I don't know if I've overcome it yet.
Well, even if
It's
you
still
have
a
it,
fight.
but you're like you're going to a program really soon in
Yeah.
Spain that you got into.
Yeah.
So what is that program called again?
It's the Jóvenes Líderes de la Iberosfera.
And you said it's only 10
Wait,
of you
let me try to
guys.
pronounce that. Just kidding.
But you said there's only 10 of y'all
Yeah,
going at
I
all.
think so. I don't know the exact number yet, but this is the third class that they've done it with, and the other classes have been like around 10 people.
So even if you like feel like you have this imposter syndrome, what is it that you choose to actively step out of that and push yourself more?
I think it's something, maybe you guys can speak to it as well, but like doesn't fully go away. Like going into the program, I'm still like, oh my gosh, like they don't know yet. Like they made a mistake. And like part of it is like I got good recommendations from people here and people that I've worked for here. That allowed me to get into the program. So sometimes I'm like, that's the only reason I got in. But
It sounds
they don't
like
know
you
that.
just say yes, which
I
I
just
think
say
is
yes
like
to everything.
yeah, it's just like you're presented an opportunity, and it doesn't sound like you allow your imposter syndrome, like fear that's swirling around, to
allow
say
it.
like,
Yeah.
oh, you can't go, like don't do it, you're not good enough. Like okay, I guess I'll pass. You're like, maybe I do, but I'm doing it. Which
Just do it.
Yeah,
And like,
just do it.
you know what? Maybe it won't come out exactly like you would have wanted it to. Like when you get asked to be on a podcast, you're like, maybe I'll say something really stupid. But just say like, I'll just say yes to any opportunity, prep as good as you can, and just do it. Like that's what I would encourage everyone to do. It's something my mom always told me, but like say yes to everything and like things will come to you. And like that's kind of how I ended up at the White House. Like there was this opportunity for me to finish my last semester in DC, and it kind of fell on my lap and I did it. And then the internship kind of fell on my lap and I did it. And then they offered me a job. It's just like a sequence of things just like being offered to you and you saying yes. But does it go away? When I started at TPPF, I've never felt like more of that imposter syndrome because people here are so smart. And I was like not understanding a lot of the things that were being like explained to me, and I was seeing like how people talked even in a social way is so intelligent.
Yeah.
And I was like, I feel like I don't belong here. But you know, it doesn't go away. Just make sure that you say yes to every opportunity that comes your way, and good things will come.
Yeah, I like that second part of your advice where it's like, don't look at it as like, I am a junior in college and I want to work in Washington D.C. in the White House. Like, how do I get to that giant step? Like, there's no way. But what I just heard from you is that it's like little steps, saying yes over and over again, working hard, being diligent, and eventually you'll look up and find yourself at the top of the mountain.
Yeah, just try to always step out of your comfort zone. I guess it's not always easy, but.
Well, that's awesome. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us
Thanks
and hanging
for having
out.
me.
You did great on the podcast. You didn't say anything wrong, so cancel that fear out. Why don't you do a shout out for the podcast that you're on? Because you are also the host of one.
Oh, thank you. I would have forgotten that, but I would encourage everyone, me and my boss, Joshua Trevino, we have a podcast about every 2 weeks on Mexico policy, U.S.-Mexico relations, what's going on in Latin America now as well. And so it's called Hard Country. And I would encourage everyone that's interested in that stuff to listen to it. Thank you. I almost forgot.
Absolutely. We were totally going to do cross promo on this podcast. Well, thank you so much, Melissa.
Thanks for having
Ari.
me, you guys.
It has been so fun.
Yeah, I'm excited for our next episode.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys soon.
See y'all.